I got another gothic horror read in. This time around, we got Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So this is one I just wrapped up. I got the 1818 text. You're going to hear people say if you're going to read this novel, find the 1818 text. So this is a complete and unabridged, a watermill classic. Anyways, it was bought this used, I want to say something like 25 years ago. I finally got around to it. There's a couple pencil notes in it. I obviously wasn't checking for that kind of stuff, and I'm not sure where I could have bought this. In any case, it is relatively good quality. It has a crease in it. Not sure if it was already there. If it was me, it was probably already there because I don't read like Savage. But in any case, this is it's a pretty solid book. So there's just a couple pencil markings along the way with some notes and some passages that got called out and as a reminder, and that kind of made for an interesting secondary read experience because I was reading the book, but I was also thinking about the prior book owner's read of the book because of what they were highlighting. I'm like, was this for school? Was this for I just wondered, was it for an essay at some point? I'm not sure. Anyways, it was intriguing, an unexpected little twist there in the reading of this book. In any case, I want to give a quick review of this book because it's still fresh up here, and I got a couple notes in front of me just to try to keep me on the rails. But if you've watched the Dracula review that I did recently, I obviously cannot keep myself on the goddamn rails. I gave this a 5 out of 5 star rating. I'm just going to start with that up front in case that's all you're here for. Now you know how much I really enjoy this book. Was I expecting to give this book a 5 out of 5 star rating? No, I was not. Especially considering that I didn't give Dracula a 5 out of 5 star rating, and I did expect to give Bram Stoker's Dracula a 5 star. And having just read Dracula and then read this one, I kind of see why, and I'm also confused at myself because of the reasons I'm going to get into for what was shockingly appealing to me about this read of this book. Maybe it's the unexpected part of it. Like, I went into this book expecting less, and I went into Dracula expecting more. Anyways, let me explain the scoring now if you want to get the granular details around this review. But first up, this was written by a 19-year-old Mary Shelley. I didn't know that that detail, that she was so young when she read this, when she wrote this book, in the time period that she wrote it. You know what I mean? Like, I went into this kind of with that in mind, and I was like, this is crazy. Because the context of reading this, understanding that it was written by a 19-year-old woman in the early 1800s, that's meaningful. On the last page here, it gives her bio, and it does say that at the age of 16, she met the famous British poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, whom she later married. The idea of a man who creates life in the form of a horrible and grotesque monster came to Mary in a vivid waking dream. With her husband's encouragement, she used this idea as the basis for Frankenstein. It was written when she was only 19 years old. After Percy's death, Mary Shelley continued to write, but produced nothing to equal the success of this classical tale of horror. In any case, that encouragement gave us one of the best modern classics of the day that has, of course, spawned plenty of other tales about this kind of idea, which are nothing like this kind of idea. Maybe that's why this became such a special surprise read for me. It feels incredibly modern in its exploration of ambition, identity, and the consequences of unchecked creation, which is obviously the primary theme of this book. There was one movie I watched, I still have it around, but I forget who did it, unfortunately. But I remember there being a part in that, like the middle, the act 2 part of that movie, being about Frankenstein finding these people in these huts or cottages. You get to see a version of the monster that's trying to understand beauty. I remember this, like serenity, like the monster is trying to peacefully integrate with the landscape, trying to find that connection and that understanding of humanity. And I thought that was maybe just like an artistic version, like vibe that this movie was going for, that it was set up to be a juxtaposition to then make the monstrous part of Frankenstein's monster, like that falling, like make that degradation feel more monstrous, and that wasn't true. That was literally in the original. Like, even more so in the original. It was crazy. Frankenstein's monster is definitely not that lumbering brute force of nature that we get in most of the modern iterations, or even like the Universal Pictures iterations, right, of the monster. Like, it's just like, baffling. This was baffling to me. Baffling discovery. Oh my gosh. Like, one of the most striking layers of this was just how intelligent Frankenstein's monster actually was, how eloquent they were in speech, how philosophical they were, introspective. There was just this nature about the monster that it got to the layer of this monster really investigating the deeply human struggle of acceptance and meaning. And I found that very fascinating. Like the Universal Pictures take on the monster, pure monster, right? And no real anything else. It's like the body is there, but the mind is not. And that's absolutely not the case in the experience you get out of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The classical, the prime version of Frankenstein. Fascinating. Just really, truly fascinating. One of the novel's greatest strengths, which generally is a weakness for me, is when the pace of the story is way too fast. And that's very much like a modern kind of take to storytelling, right? Like get to the point, move things along, keep things action oriented, like focus on the stuff that is meaningful to the immediate story at hand. That's not what happened in Dracula. It was very, very sluggish, and it spent a lot of time just like fluffing up a lot of the prose. Again, I thought I would love that, and I actually felt like it was overdone in Dracula, whereas on this one, just the pace of it, like in Act 1, the monster's creation happens, and I remember kind of coming to and going, wait, did I fall asleep? Like that was I in a waking dream? Like, because I felt like, when did the monster get made and when did the monster escape? And it was literally in one paragraph. Like I had to go back and reread. I'm like, I must have flipped pages here because I don't remember the "it's alive" moment. You know what I'm saying? Like that doesn't exist in here. You get this creeping addiction that Frankenstein goes through because he wants to investigate life or the sciences. Like he wants to unravel the mysteries that could make this thing happen. And then when he makes it happen, like maybe he realizes he's past a threshold he shouldn't have. But it happens so rapidly that but by the time it dawned on me, it's like he's returning to the apartment. He opens the door hoping that the thing isn't in there. I'm like, what do you mean hoping that the thing isn't in there? When did it escape? Did you let it loose? Did you just like, what happened right now? And so anyways, that's literally in the first quarter of the book. And then the next 50% run, the Act 2 portion of this, it's really more an investigation of the consequences of having created the monster and the impact on Frankenstein's psyche along the way. While I was initially struck by how quickly this monumental moment just fleeted by, I was also looking forward to seeing how the next 50% of the novel would play out, considering this big part of the story had played. I thought this would have been a midpoint or something like that. It absolutely was not. It was like 25% marks. And then Mary Shelley just turns her attention to exploring the consequences and the emotional toll that follows to Victor Frankenstein along the way. I also didn't anticipate Victor being as young as he was when he created the monster. We all get from, again, the modern versions of this, the retellings, we get the Dr. Frankenstein, right? We got the older kind of mad scientist, Victor Frankenstein, and that very literally is not the case in the original. He has just gone off to school, in the Act 1, he meets his professors, and he's investigating things like chemistry, mathematics. Like he's interested in these other things. Again, it's a more philosophical perspective of science is what Victor is intrigued about since he was a very young kid. And he takes that interest with him to when he goes off to school, and then in the investigation during school, I think it took him like 2 years to kind of find the body parts at slaughterhouses and stuff like that in order to experiment and create the monster that becomes the monster Frankenstein. And so I was not expecting that, because he'd literally be in maybe his early 20s when all of this happened. He was very much not in his 40s or 50s or 60s. It's crazy. And was he a mad scientist? I mean, not really. He wasn't depicted as a mad scientist. He became a little bit unhinged after what he had done and what he realized he could do and what he discovered and the secrets that he was, of course, not going to reveal to the world, and he never does. But he gets unhinged, but that's because the mental toil of realizing maybe what he has done and like the threshold that he crossed that he shouldn't have crossed. And I mean, the investigation of that psyche along the way was extremely intriguing. I really enjoyed it. And so what follows is this compelling exploration of the two primary characters. Victor, of course, the ambitious but guilt-ridden creator, and the creature themselves, which never gets named, which has its own subtext. An abandoned being who learns very quickly and painfully the cruelty of humanity. Man, it's great. Like I mentioned up front, the monster's intelligence, his ability to reason, and his sense of injustice. Like, he's a tragic character who seeks connection and meaning, and one of the great ways Act 2 is split up is that we get kind of what happens to Victor along the way, like that degradation and like kind of being afraid that the fact that the monster is out there. And because we're in the first person perspective, we lose the context of where the monster is. Like, I have no idea, unless there's like a news article that comes in. Like, sometimes there's letters back and forth to some of the characters, but really we lose that perspective. And the great thing about Act 2 is that halfway through, the midpoint kind of reversal is the monster does find Victor again, and then the monster is telling Victor, hey, this is what my life has been like for the last, I think it's 2 years. Learning language, trying to make connections with, again, these people that hate him for the monster that he is, and of course that ends up leading to ruin. But he really, like, he had an opportunity, the monster had an opportunity to kind of discover what it would have been like to understand beautiful things and want beautiful things, because that was an aspect of humanity that he would be an observer of. Like, he could see families and love and all the stuff that made a human a human, and that's really like the part of the identity that he was missing. At the end of the day, he knew he was created. He was very self-aware of the creature that he was, and being feared on sight was an unfortunate barrier, because not a single human in this novel who witnesses the monster gives them a chance. And so it becomes extremely tragic the more you get the monster's context through Act 2. The monster pleads with Victor to make him a mate, make him a partner, make him one as ugly and as himself, but equal to himself, like one of his being, right? And Victor, of course, denies this. He will not do it, and he'd rather die and all this stuff, right? But at the end of the day, he actually gets, because this is where the intelligence of the monster comes out, and that eloquent rhetoric that the monster will use, and it's almost like a brain of science, talking with a brain of science, and philosophy, because that's really what motivated Victor to go on this journey in the first place. And now here he has his own creation, his son, to some degree, given back to him the same philosophical ideas that really should have been at the premise of Victor's own philosophical journey that led him on this journey in the first place. So you got a little bit of a cyclical loop there that happens, and I did not expect that to come from the monster. So the crazy talk. It's almost like the yin-yang kind of feeling happens throughout this entire novel, but for very different reasons, because whereas the monster eventually in reaction does start to murder people, because that the vengeance becomes strong and the rage, and he doesn't really understand the impacts that these have at first. But then when he does that, with the intelligence that he does have, he's able to become conniving about it, and that's a crazy leap. And so because he's still investigating that spectrum of morality, the monster uses it more like a threat for Victor to give the monster what he wants, which is just, hey, give me the partner, the mate, someone that I can spend the rest of my life with. Like he'll promise, like, they're going to go to some remote area, no one will ever see them again, and that'll be done, right? But he'll just get what he wants. But it's the method that the monster uses to try to get that out of Victor. It shows the monstrous nature of the creature themselves. As intelligent as the monster is, it can't really separate those two things, or it does. He's a brilliant psychopath at the end of the day. Victor, on the other hand, is a completely insensitive human, because it's not that Victor's doing anything wrong. Like, he's the one who crossed the line in the first place, right? He could have just destroyed this thing, but he never did. He never does. He never attempts to. So that also, like, is very telling. In the encounters that he had with the monster, I don't think he could have done. Like, there's no way he could have physically taken the monster out, right? But there was not even a thought. Like, I don't remember reading the thought of taking them out. Eventually, Victor's like, yeah, you know, when it was like in Act 3, right, chasing the monster down, and like it's either me or him. That kind of. But I'm like, but how are you gonna do it? With a shot, with a bullet? Like, I'm not sure a bullet alone is gonna do it. And the monster's obviously superior in almost every way. So returning back to the plot, the flow of it is largely driven by tension. Every chapter has a meaningful contribution to that pacing. So there's only maybe a chapter. I think there's like a chapter in late Act 2, right before we crest into Act 3, where Victor does a lot of traveling. I lost a little bit of the point of why we were doing a chapter on the different cities that Victor was visiting. He was traveling with others at the time. Clerval was a very good friend, and of course, maybe it's because Mary wanted to get us connected with Clerval, so that when the monster comes back to punish Victor by starting to murder the people closest to him, that we maybe felt something for Clerval. So when Clerval's taken away, we're like, oh no. But the point is, like, there wasn't enough time spent with the characters that get taken out for me to care about any of them that got taken out, including Elizabeth, which was like obviously the big, like, the Act 3 like kablamo moment was, and you could see this from a mile away, you know what I mean? Because although Victor initially promises to the monster that he will create one like him, and he starts to create the female version, but then he destroys the project because he can't see himself take that project to fruition. So he just destroys it, abandons it, and flees. But the monster's kind of observing him the entire time, so the monster knows that he's abandoned this and destroyed that possibility. And so the monster starts taking loved ones away from Victor, and we know that this is going to culminate in, of course, the taking away of Elizabeth at the wedding night. The monster literally threatens him, warns him with, oh, I forget the line. There's no way I'm going to just be able to flip to it at this point, but maybe it gets mentioned a lot, and it'll be in italics, so maybe I'll find it right here. So I will be with you on your wedding night is the last threat that the monster gives Victor for him not fulfilling his promise. And so we know that on the wedding night, monster's going to wait. He's going to let him, like, psychologically break down along the way. The strangeness of Victor's breakdown or acknowledgement of that threat is that Victor always recenters it back on him. He's like, after my wedding night, I'm going to get killed. After my wedding night, he's going to, you know, like, Victor is the one that's going to meet that demise. And I'm like, bro, what part of that line didn't you read into? Like, you took away his bride, the bride of Frankenstein. We can kind of see where that comes from, like with the modern iterations and stuff like that. But like, you took away their partner, so the monster's going to take away yours. bro. Like, I don't understand. So, but it was right until like the final moment, and then you're like, of course, that's exactly where this led. And of course, that then kicks off the Act 3 chase, and this chase was pretty good. Like the tension of the chase into the Arctic, and kind of that, like, it's me or the monster, and Victor really going, like, it literally could have just been like he's gonna go as far to the end of the world if he has to, and the monster is baiting him the entire time, keeping him alive just enough by leaving some food behind or whatever the case might be, because the monster wants Victor to suffer like the monster did for years, in order to like find something that could keep him going as a human, but he was denied that humanity. And so the monster wanted to strip Victor of his humanity, and really make and tear him down to the fundamentals, like of survival, right? Because it's what the monster had to go through, is what I read into. In any case, Victor eventually gets picked up by a boat, and then he hopes that the boat and the captain of the boat and the crew on the boat will help complete the journey of taking out the monster. But eventually Victor's health breaks down and he just can't go on, and so he literally did go right until the end. He, as much as he could, like, he fought as much as he could to maintain enough health to keep the chase going, but health won out and the monster comes on board and basically admits to the captain that they're also done. Like, the father is done, and now the monster is gonna go off again to the northest of the northern points and build a funeral pyre for themselves, and then step into it and then just end themselves. Just, that's it. Their mission is now over. Like, the monster equalized the punishment that was brought onto him. He brought onto Victor, and now both of them can end the world together. And I thought that was an intriguing way to end it, because it's like the monster does win, but the monster wins by like acknowledging that they also have no reason to live, because they've been denied anything that would give them a purpose to live, and to live for the right reasons, like benevolent reasons, right? Find that meaning that would have allowed them to discover the humanity within themselves, despite them having been created by corpse parts and not by natural means. So without a doubt, all of that tension, especially since like the monster met Victor all the way to the end, it definitely made for a page turner. It was full of dramatic highs, gut-wrenching lows, all while probing the larger themes of creation, responsibility, and the pursuit of knowledge, which I didn't expect to come from the monster. Am I repeating myself too much? Anyways, so sure, some parts felt rushed, absolutely, such as the monster's escape, like I mentioned up front, where I had to reread the chapter to find the one paragraph where the damn thing was mentioned. I really wish that was like just expanded on. That should have been its own chapter. No, that's all I was asking for. Should have been its own chapter. But at the same time, it allowed us to get deeper into the minds of Victor along the way, and then eventually get the monster's perspective. And the novel isn't large. I mean, this version is 300 pages, but it's obvious that Mary Shelley crafted a story here that was very intentional, and every conflict deepened the central themes: the danger of unchecked ambition and the moral weight of creating life without considering the consequences. And obviously this is a staple of Gothic horror literature, classic literature, right? But it's possibly a book that defies categorization, especially when you think about it from the context of, again, the early 1800s, right? Because yes, it's a horror, absolutely, but at the same time, it's also a philosophical debate. I love philosophy. I love classic horror, Gothic horror, but I'm also a big fan of philosophy, and some of the central themes that I focused on during university in philosophy was the nature of identity and just the investigation of any of those aspects. And that's likely what attracted me to Gothic literature, or that older classical literature as well, because those two academic focuses intersected, and I really enjoyed delving into those layers of thinking along the way. It's a critique on humanity, of course. Who is the actual monster is the easiest way that you summarize something like this. Is it the monster, Frankenstein, or is it Victor themselves? Because again, the first like introduction of the monster is extremely peaceful, to be honest. Like, nothing gets violent until the reactions to the monster as a monster start to kind of lead the monster astray in an almost childlike manner that they have to kind of understand and come to terms with, because they are literally a child in a monstrously adult 8-foot body, and this was a monster that had no guidance along the way. The monster very literally worked for that enlightenment along the way. That's kind of fascinating, you know, because had he had a Victor guide him, a father guide his mental development and moral development, maybe this would have been like a boon to society, having something like this, right? And the fact that this could have led to the creation of more beings like this, possibly. There's just so much you can get into, right? There's nurture versus nature. There's obviously like nurture was missing, and then nature alone was working until humans got involved and then twisted up the monster, right? The monster didn't twist up the monster. The monster got twisted up by humanity by trying to unravel and discover what it was to be human. That's the irony of it all. That's where the beautiful like dance happens in this book. I keep bringing this back in the frame. I could have just put this down 30 minutes ago. In any case, jeez. The tale where both the creator and the monster are simultaneously both the villains and the victims. And I love that dynamic. And where questions of guilt, love, purpose linger well beyond the final page. A masterpiece in every sense. 5 out of 5. It has its flaws. I called them out, but the balance of it all is just the pacing surprised me. The monster's intelligence surprised me. These were things that would have possibly had me give this book a 4 out of 5 just for my own subjective preferences, but it surprised me. It surprised me in its execution, and because I can't give 4.5s on Goodreads, there are no halvesies. I rounded up because this would become a recommend. So 5-star books for me it's a recommend. The context of Mary Shelley being 19 when she wrote it as well in the early 1800s, that bumped it for me. That's just extremely inspiring is all I have to say. So there you go, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Hope you enjoyed the review. I'll catch you in the next one. Don't forget to explore, engage, and inspire, buddy. Peace.